Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Real Spill Stories channel. Today's story is full of secrets, betrayal, old wounds, and one mistake that could destroy an entire career in a single night. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Madeline jolted awake and opened her eyes, not immediately realizing where she was. Her arm tingled painfully. Apparently, she had fallen asleep right at her workstation, slumped over the hard countertop in an awkward position. Through the bakery's panoramic window, the cold gray light of early morning was already creeping in, and someone was pounding loudly and insistently on the front door. She straightened up, rubbing her stiff neck, and her gaze landed on the massive, three-tier masterpiece, standing on a display stand in the center of the table. The cake looked monumental, sharp chocolate edges coated in dark velvet icing the color of deep midnight blue, elegant details of delicate edible gold leaf, and towering on top were the giant numbers 65. Pure perfection, pure masculine elegance. It was an order for a lavish anniversary celebration. Fragments of memory slowly came back to her. Madeline had agreed to this insane rush order against all common sense, knowing one job like this could practically pay her bills for an entire month. Crafting the intricate chocolate, sales and decorations had taken all of yesterday. She had baked the sponge layers ahead of time, but because she was running out of time, the assembly and final smoothing had to be done alone late into the night. Naomi, her assistant, had left around 11, but Madeline stayed behind. She remembered carefully stacking the layers. She remembered finishing everything. And then, darkness. Her body had simply shut down the second she added the final touch. The knocking came again. The client, a man named Ethan, had warned her in their messages that he'd arrive around 7 in the morning. It was more convenient for him to personally supervise loading the cake. Before the celebration began, Madeline quickly fixed her messy hair, smoothed her apron, and tried to make herself look at least somewhat alive before opening the door. A well-dressed young man stood on the doorstep, wearing an expensive tailored coat, a neat haircut, and an observant gaze touched with faint amusement. Behind him stood two assistants. "Good morning. Sorry if I'm too early," he said. The pastry chef shook her head, and the guest stepped inside. He froze in front of the cake. In the pale morning light, the confection looked flawless. Ethan slowly walked around the table, nodding with open admiration. "Impressive," he said quietly. "It really does look incredible." Then he glanced at the exhausted baker and smirked slightly. "Judging by the way you look, you spent the whole night hauling 50-pound flour bags. Your eyes are completely red." Madeline tried to smile. "You're not far from the truth," she admitted. "The final decoration took a lot out of me. Honestly, the gold details are harder than flour sacks when one mistake can ruin your reputation." "Well," Ethan replied with a satisfied nod, "I'm glad you took my order seriously. Today is a big day for my father. Richard Caldwell is a very respected man in this city, and that comes with certain expectations." He paused before adding with a dry smile, "And let's just say, he's extremely strict with people who disappoint him. He likes everything done perfectly. Hopefully, I wasn't wrong trusting your bakery after all the glowing online reviews." At Ethan's signal, the two assistants carefully lifted the 10-kilogram cake and carried it outside. After politely saying goodbye, Ethan followed them. Madeline locked the door behind him and finally exhaled in relief. The worst part was over. Now she could make herself a cup of coffee, wait for Naomi to arrive, and finally go home to sleep for the next decade. She stepped behind the counter and instinctively reached for the necklace around her neck to adjust her lucky charm, a small golden locket containing her mother's photo. But her fingers touched only the empty chain. The clasp had come undone. Ice shot down her spine. Madeline immediately began searching frantically. She tore through every corner of the bakery, from the storage room to the front display area. Nothing. The locket was gone. Then slowly, her eyes drifted toward the now empty table where the anniversary cake had stood. Just minutes earlier, her stomach dropped. Images from last night flashed through her mind. There she was leaning over the middle tier, spreading thick chocolate cream between the layers, working automatically, almost on instinct, barely even looking anymore because exhaustion had taken over. "Oh my God," she whispered as her chest tightened in horror. "I baked it into the cake." Her imagination instantly painted the nightmare in perfect detail. Deep beneath layers of rich chocolate sponge and blueberry filling, hidden forever under frosting and cream, rested her gold family heirloom. She pictured the distinguished birthday guest cutting into the dessert during dinner and discovering metal inside his slice. Or worse, someone breaking a tooth on it. The scandal wouldn't just be bad, it would destroy her bakery. Madeline stared blankly at the schedule for upcoming orders. She still had work to do. Mechanically, she turned on the mixer and watched the whisk beat egg whites for another order. But all she could see in her mind was that cake. How did this even happen? She whispered. She switched the mixer off and collapsed onto a stool. Why did everything go wrong with this order? She'd been on her feet for nearly 20 hours. The exhaustion was so thick and heavy her brain barely functioned anymore. The order really had been insane from the beginning. Taking on a custom luxury cake 2 days before the event was absolute madness. But the client was wealthy and influential, and the payment had been too tempting for a struggling little private bakery barely surviving month to month, and she had wanted to prove to herself that she could pull it off. Naomi wouldn't arrive for several more hours. The bakery was empty. Panicking and not knowing what else to do, Madeline called her mother. "Mom, I'm doomed," she said miserably the second the call connected. She confessed everything: the overnight shift, the high-profile order for a powerful businessman, and the missing locket now buried somewhere inside layers of chocolate cake. "If they find it, that's it," she whispered. "My bakery is finished." Her mother stayed silent for a moment before replying calmly. "Maddie, sweetheart, you need to call them and tell the truth. Say there's a foreign object inside the cake. Better yet, go there personally, apologize, and offer to fix the situation. Honesty is the only way to save your reputation." Her mother's words sparked an idea. Confess honestly basically amounts to an elite client that she was incompetent. No, she would handle this differently. Yes, she would go there, but not to confess. She would go there to retrieve the locket herself. Heart pounding, she dialed Ethan's number. "Hi, Ethan. This is Madeline," she said, forcing herself to sound calm. "You know, I've been thinking. The cake is actually a very delicate and complicated structure. To portion it correctly takes a certain level of skill. An inexperienced waiter could easily ruin it, especially at such an important event." She swallowed hard. "So I'd like to offer an additional complimentary service. I can come personally during dessert and cut the cake myself, completely free of charge, as a bonus for your order." A short pause followed. Then Ethan laughed warmly. "Wow, that's what I call customer service, Madeline. Do all your clients get this kind of treatment, or is my father just special?" There was playful amusement in his voice. Madeline blushed furiously, grateful he couldn't see her. "Only in exceptional circumstances," she joked weakly, fighting the urge to confess everything right then and there. "I just care a lot about my bakery's reputation." "Well, I respect that," Ethan replied more seriously. "Come by around 5 this evening. I'll text you the address. Dinner starts at 6, so you'll need to be ready by dessert time. Someone will provide your uniform when you arrive." When the call ended, Madeline sat frozen. The plan was completely insane, but now it was already in motion. She just had to get there. Take the knife, cut the cake into slices, find the locket hidden somewhere inside, slip it quietly into her pocket, save her reputation, save her mother's keepsake, and leave unnoticed. When Naomi arrived around 11, Madeline was barely standing. After handing off the day's orders, she finally made it home and collapsed onto her bed. A few hours of sleep disappeared in what felt like seconds, but when she woke up, she felt strangely feverish and alert. After splashing ice-cold water on her face, she called a cab and headed to the address Ethan had sent. The taxi pulled up in front of massive iron gates hiding a luxurious mansion, surrounded by greenery. Madeline entered through the open gate and introduced herself to security. The guard vaguely explained how to reach the service entrance around the side. She hurried down the garden path but soon realized she was lost. This side of the estate was completely empty. No guests, no staff, no one to ask for directions. As she wandered through the garden, she suddenly heard muffled voices nearby and instinctively slowed down. "We need to strike while the iron's hot," a man's voice said quietly, while Richard's distracted celebrating. "It's the perfect moment to slip the agreement into the paperwork stack. I already prepared the documents. I only need 1 minute to slide them into the folder for his signature. Today's chaotic enough that he won't even notice what he's signing." "Are you sure this'll work?" a woman asked sharply. "I'm tired of living off scraps from his table. I want everything. And I want his useless son Ethan left with absolutely nothing." "For you, sweetheart," the man replied smoothly, "I'd do anything. We'll drain their accounts so elegantly they won't realize what happened until it's far too late." At the word sweetheart, Madeline carefully parted the branches of a manicured jasmine bush. Near a small gazebo stood a stunning brunette in a breathtaking designer gown that probably cost more than 6 months of bakery revenue. Beside her stood an older but polished Man in a blue pinstripe tweed suit with perfectly groomed mustaches. Madeline stared at the woman's face. No doubt about it. It was her, Vanessa Sterling, her college classmate, the same beautiful, ruthless girl who always climbed over everyone else to get what she wanted. Memory instantly dragged Madeline back into the past. A classroom, Vanessa and her friends laughing hysterically awkward little Madeline in oversized sweaters and thick glasses. Look at this disaster, Vanessa used to sneer. Girls like her are born to clean up after everyone else. Vanessa had always dressed like she stepped straight out of a luxury boutique, and everyone at college whispered that wealthy older men financed her glamorous lifestyle. Looking at her now, the greedy eyes, the manipulative smile aimed at the man beside her. Madeline realized something instantly. Vanessa hadn't changed at all. Realizing she'd overheard something she definitely wasn't supposed to hear, Madeline carefully backed away. Her plan to rescue the locket suddenly seemed far less simple. Now it included a ghost from her past who would absolutely enjoy humiliating her all over again. After wandering a few more minutes, she finally found the service entrance and almost immediately ran into Ethan. He was wearing a sleek tuxedo and speaking with a member of the household staff, but when he saw her, he visibly relaxed. Madeline, good, you're right on time. He gestured for her to follow him down the hallway. The head chef already asked about the cake. Guests are arriving. Ethan. Madeline hesitated awkwardly. I just saw my old classmate Vanessa in the garden. She lowered her voice. Sorry if this is inappropriate, but are you related? Ethan slowed his pace and turned toward her. His expression hardened instantly. Vanessa is my father's young wife, he said coldly. My stepmother, as strange as that sounds. The world really is small, Madeline murmured. She hasn't changed. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What exactly do you mean by that? Madeline hesitated. Go on, Ethan said quietly. There's nobody here except us. I'm under no illusions about my stepmother. Madeline nervously tightened her grip on her purse strap. She used to mock me constantly in college. I was awkward back then. Big sweaters, glasses. While she always showed off expensive designer brands, she exhaled slowly and honestly. People always whispered that older, wealthy men paid for her lifestyle. Ethan's jaw tightened. Sounds like the rumors weren't wrong, he muttered. My father is blindly in love with her. To him she's an innocent angel. To me, he paused bitterly. She's a predator waiting for the right moment. Ethan, Madeline whispered, lowering her voice even more. I overheard her talking in the garden. She was with a man in a blue tweed suit with mustaches. Ethan's face changed immediately. Gregory Whitmore, he said sharply. Our family attorney. Without another word, he pulled her into a nearby storage room and shut the door. Surrounded by shelves of dishes and kitchen supplies, they were finally alone. What exactly did you hear? He asked urgently. Please. This isn't curiosity. Madeline repeated everything carefully. The forged documents, the plan to swap paperwork during the party, the comments about acting quickly while everyone was distracted. When she finished, Ethan stood silently for several seconds, staring into space. So Gregory is involved too, he whispered. Then he checked his watch. In half an hour everyone will sit down for dinner. My father really could sign anything without looking. Determination and pain battled in his eyes. He looked at Madeline and lightly touched her shoulder. Madeline, I have to go. Please don't tell anyone about this. Keep acting normal. I'll try to stop it before it happens. Then he hurried away. Madeline leaned against the wall, her heart pounding wildly. She changed into the pressed white blouse, dark skirt, and apron they had prepared for her. When she entered the kitchen, she immediately noticed how flawlessly everything operated. Waiters rushed back and forth, dishes clattered, and chefs worked with intense focus decorating elegant plates. The head chef glanced at her without surprise. Clearly, Ethan had already explained everything. He pointed toward the massive refrigerator where her cake stood waiting behind glass. Under the cold kitchen lights, the midnight blue velvet coating looked even darker, the gold accents even richer. It truly was beautiful, but hidden somewhere inside that masterpiece was a secret capable of turning her greatest triumph into professional disaster. Madeline, since you're here, help the team out, the head chef said. We're short-handed tonight. Carry these appetizers out. The waiters will show you where. There was no time left for panic. Someone shoved a serving tray into her hands, and trying to maintain professional composure, she stepped into the grand banquet hall. Guests had already begun gathering. Vanessa stood beside the main table surrounded by elegantly dressed women, critically examining the presentation of the dishes. Madeline carefully set down the appetizers and tried to slip away unnoticed. But then she heard a painfully familiar voice behind her. Well, ladies, Vanessa drawled loudly, look who it is, my old college classmate. We studied together. She raised her champagne glass with a smug smile. I always said some people are born to shine, and others spend their entire lives cleaning up after everyone else. Madeline froze. Vanessa stepped closer, studying her face before her lips curled into a cruel, victorious grin. So you're still serving people and cleaning tables, huh? She deliberately adjusted the enormous diamond necklace sparkling around her neck beneath the chandelier lights. No ring, no decent dress. Looks like being honest and hardworking didn't exactly pay off for you. Heat rushed into Madeline's cheeks. She clutched the empty tray against her chest like a shield, unable to walk away or respond. Any reaction could cause a scene, and if she caused trouble, they'd never let her near the cake. The surrounding guests watched with polite curiosity while Vanessa practically glowed with superiority. Vanessa, as usual, you're exaggerating, Ethan's calm, authoritative voice suddenly interrupted. He appeared beside Madeline as if out of nowhere and gently but confidently touched her elbow. Allow me to correct you. Madeline isn't a waitress. He looked directly at the guests. She's the owner of her own pastry studio and the creator of the incredible dessert everyone's waiting for tonight. Then he smiled faintly. And honestly, it took quite a bit of convincing to get her to attend my father's celebration personally. He subtly winked at Madeline. Then he turned toward Vanessa again, meeting her eyes directly. So let's not confuse professionalism with servitude. Vanessa's smile tightened instantly. Madeline, Ethan continued smoothly, I believe the head chef was looking for you. She nodded gratefully, finally able to breathe again. Straightening her shoulders, she headed back toward the kitchen doors. Just then, Richard Caldwell entered the hall. Guests immediately swarmed around him with congratulations. Vanessa's entire expression transformed in a heartbeat into the perfect image of a loving hostess as she hurried toward her husband. But as she passed Madeline, she lightly bumped her shoulder and hissed quietly, and make sure you do your job properly. One mistake, and you'll leave here humiliated. Madeline silently returned to the kitchen where the head chef calmly checked the timer on the wall. Sit down while you can, he told her, pointing to an empty chair. The guests still have appetizers, soup, and the main course before dessert. You've got about an hour and a half. Nobody bothered her after that. Watching the kitchen staff work in perfect rhythm, Madeline gradually calmed down, and for some reason, she began remembering the last few years of her life. Her bakery journey had started after moving out of her mother's apartment into a tiny rented studio. She had plenty of free time, but almost no money. To earn extra cash, she started baking at night. At first, it was simple cupcakes for college friends. She remembered the excitement of buying each new baking pan and watching her client base slowly grow. People kept coming back because they trusted her. Madeline never let anyone down. Eventually, baking became her entire life. She took a huge risk, rented a commercial space, and invested every saved dollar into professional equipment. It had been hard. Money was always tight. She could never afford more employees besides loyal Naomi. Madeline understood that her current workload was probably her limit. She would likely never reach the luxurious lifestyle Vanessa enjoyed, but she had never regretted her choices. To her, an honest name earned through hard work mattered far more than somebody else's diamonds. Time flew by amid the noise of the busy kitchen and the distant sounds of celebration from the banquet hall. Finally, the head chef checked the clock and clapped his hands. All right, everyone. Final act. Then he turned toward Madeline and nodded toward the cake, now removed from refrigeration. The moment has come. Showtime. Dessert was ready to be served. Madeline stood and accepted the long, perfectly sharpened knife handed to her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. The banquet hall doors swung open. Waiters ceremoniously rolled the cart forward, surrounded by sparkling dessert fireworks. The cake looked elegant, expensive, and undeniably masculine. 3 tiers wrapped in dark velvet chocolate the color of a midnight sky. It was her signature recipe, rich Belgian chocolate sponge layers filled with homemade blueberry compote and delicate mascarpone cream infused with a touch of aged cognac. Madeline walked behind the cart, carefully holding the knife. Suddenly, all exhaustion vanished. Only sharp, vibrating tension remained. The host announced dessert, and every guest turned toward the cake. The music faded beneath applause. Richard Caldwell, still imposing despite his age, stepped away from the crowd and approached the dessert table. Let's do this, my dear, he said softly, looking directly into Madeline's eyes. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and hit the like button. More dramatic stories with shocking twists are coming soon on Real Spill. There was none of the arrogance Madeline had expected in his eyes. The older man looked at her with a strangely wise squint, as if he could read every thought running through her mind. The look unsettled her, but there was no turning back now. She steadied herself and made the first cut. The blade slid into the dense chocolate sponge almost effortlessly. With practiced precision, Madeline lifted the first perfect, triangular slice and gently placed it onto a dessert plate. Richard Caldwell gave an approving grunt, and whispers of admiration spread throughout the hall. The cross-section looked flawless, clean layers of dark sponge, blueberry filling, and cream perfectly aligned. After that, her hands moved automatically. Madeline sliced quickly and cleanly while waiters swiftly carried plates down the long banquet table. With every new cut, she searched desperately, hoping to feel the hard resistance of metal against the knife or catch a glimpse of gold before the slice left her hands. She had counted on intercepting the locket herself while the cake was still under her control, but slice after slice disappeared, tier after tier vanished, and still nothing. When only a small portion remained on the stand, icy dread spread through her chest. The knife touched the final layer. Nothing, which meant only one thing. The locket was already out there, somewhere among the guests. Madeline froze with the knife still in her hand, feeling dizzy as blood drained from her face. Her plan had failed. The locket was now sitting on one of the dessert plates, scattered across the banquet hall. She stood perfectly still, barely breathing, watching the last slices being placed before Richard Caldwell and his wife. The silence in the room felt like the calm before disaster. And then disaster came. Vanessa had barely touched her dessert with a spoon before she suddenly recoiled and disgustedly pulled something from the dark cream. Her face twisted with fury. She shot to her feet, raising her hand high as dull gold glinted beneath the chandeliers. "What is this?" she shrieked. "There's a piece of metal inside the cake." Dozens of eyes instantly turned toward Madeline. She felt as though giant spotlights had locked onto her. Vanessa, never missing a chance for humiliation, pointed directly at the pastry chef. "There she is, a complete fraud," she snapped. "Look what this woman is feeding people." Richard Caldwell slowly set down his utensils. He looked at the object in his wife's hand before turning a heavy, piercing gaze toward the pale baker. "You made this cake?" he asked quietly, but the entire room heard him. Madeline felt her ears ringing. For one brief second, she saw her mother's face in her mind. Honesty is the only way to save your dignity. She swallowed hard and lifted her chin. "Yes," she answered steadily. "I made it. I'm so sorry. I worked almost nonstop for the last 24 hours trying to finish the order on time. And I didn't notice when my locket fell from my neck." She drew a shaky breath. "This was my mistake, and I'm fully prepared to take responsibility for it." "A mistake?" Vanessa threw the locket onto the tablecloth in front of her husband. "I could have choked on this junk," she shouted. "Do you realize you could have killed someone with your negligence? People like you shouldn't be trusted with anything more complicated than mopping floors." Madeline stood there in complete despair, feeling her entire world collapsing around her. But then Ethan rose from his chair. His voice rang through the hall, unexpectedly cold and sharp. "Vanessa, stop this ridiculous performance." He looked at his stepmother with open disgust. For someone claiming she almost swallowed a tiny gold trinket, you've had your mouth open for something far bigger. My father's entire fortune. A stunned murmur swept through the room. Vanessa froze. Her hand trembled as it reached toward her wine glass. "I know everything," Ethan continued. "While you're pretending to be the victim of some bakery accident, Gregory Whitmore has already prepared documents designed to leave my father and me financially ruined." His eyes hardened. "You and the attorney are working together, and I have proof." Vanessa tried to interrupt, but Ethan didn't let her speak. Instead, he turned toward Gregory Whitmore, who had spent the entire evening trying to disappear unnoticed among the guests. Ethan pulled a document from the table and placed it directly in front of his father. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice edged with steel, "you were in such a hurry to trick my father into signing over management rights of the estate to a shell company that you accidentally left the paperwork sitting right on top of the other documents." He tilted his head coldly. "A little overconfident for someone with your professional experience, wouldn't you say?" The attorney visibly panicked. "Richard, this is all some terrible misunderstanding," he stammered, his mustache twitching nervously, realizing the situation was turning disastrous. Vanessa instantly changed tactics. She dramatically clutched her chest. "Richard, darling, you can't seriously believe this slander," she cried. "Gregory acted alone. He manipulated me. I had nothing to do with any of this." "Madeline, who had remained silent until now, suddenly couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the damage to her reputation, and Vanessa's shameless lies finally overwhelmed her natural shyness. "You're lying, Vanessa," she said firmly. Every head turned toward her. "I heard your conversation in the garden. You were the one pushing him to act faster. You said you were tired of living off your husband's leftovers and wanted everything for yourself." She paused. "And you said Richard Caldwell disgusted you." A ringing silence fell across the room. No one moved. Richard slowly rose from his chair. He looked at his wife as though seeing her for the very first time, and in his eyes sat the deep sadness of a man finally forced to accept a painful truth. "You never mentioned that part while begging me to buy you a villa on the coast," he said quietly. A shadow of regret crossed his face. "But I'm inclined to believe this young woman more than my own wife. She couldn't possibly know those details unless she heard them directly from you." Vanessa completely lost control. Her face flushed bright red. "Richard, you're listening to some ridiculous pastry girl," she snapped hysterically. "She's a hypocritical amateur who can't even bake properly. She made all this up to distract everyone from her own incompetence. She's just jealous of my life." But the birthday guest only looked at her with cold exhaustion. "Leave my house immediately, Vanessa," he said evenly. "Security will escort you out and make sure you don't take anything that doesn't belong to you." Then his gaze shifted toward the attorney. "And as for you, Mr. Whitmore, beginning tomorrow my affairs will be handled by people who still remember what honesty and professional ethics mean." Vanessa exploded. "To hell with your truth," she screamed furiously. "You think you can throw me out and that's the end of it? I'll see you in court. I'll take half your fortune, you senile old fool, and you'll regret this." In a rage, she grabbed the nearest wine glass and hurled it across the room. Before storming out of the hall, the attorney hurried after her, hunched over and avoiding everyone's eyes. Richard Caldwell merely gave a short, dry chuckle. His face made one thing perfectly clear. He was far too experienced to be intimidated by threats from a spoiled young woman. The guests exchanged shocked whispers while discussing the scandal they had just witnessed. Then Richard picked up the gold locket from the tablecloth and examined it carefully. The aged metal carried an engraved pattern of intertwined verbena stems, delicate antique craftsmanship, impossible to mistake for modern jewelry. With a quiet click, he opened it and froze. Inside was a tiny photograph of a woman whose face he recognized instantly. Richard slowly lifted his eyes toward Madeline. "Verbena," he whispered with a faint nostalgic smile. "So that's whose daughter you are." Madeline stared at him in confusion. "Your mother was one of the kindest people I ever knew when I was young," he said softly. "We haven't seen each other in decades, but I still remember her honesty and her heart." His gaze warmed. "And I can see you inherited both." Slowly, the older man rose from his chair, leaning on the edge of the table. He looked around at the silent guests. "My friends," he announced calmly, "unpleasant things happened tonight, but they can be corrected. Let's move on." Then he gestured toward Madeline. "I want you all to meet this remarkable young woman properly. Madeline isn't only an example of honesty. She's an extraordinary artist." He pointed toward his half-finished dessert plate. "I've lived a long life and tasted desserts all over the world, but I have never eaten a cake this extraordinary. Not even tonight's scandal could overpower its incredible flavor." Seeing Madeline lower her head shyly, Ethan approached her and confidently took her hand. "Enough standing off to the side," he said gently, guiding her toward the table and seating her beside him. "I recognize that look in my father's eyes," he added with a grin. "Seems like you're the guest of honor tonight." There was something in his voice, and in the way he looked at her, that went far beyond gratitude. The guests who had watched the drama cautiously suddenly burst into excited conversation. "Dear, Mr. Caldwell is absolutely right," said an elegant older woman wearing pearls. "The sponge and that dark cream are heavenly." She leaned forward eagerly. "Do you take large wedding orders? My niece is getting married next month. Can I get your business card?" Another guest chimed in. "I've been searching forever for a talented pastry chef." Madeline felt the panic and exhaustion of the past 24 hours slowly melting away, replaced by warmth and safety. Sitting at that luxurious table, clutching the returned locket in her hand, she realized something incredible. Her tiny bakery had just taken a step she never even dared dream about. Within the next week alone, the bakery received 3 major luxury orders. Then even more followed. Guest after guest from the anniversary celebration placed new requests, filling the bakery's schedule for the next 6 months. But Ethan didn't stop at being merely grateful. Recognizing both the bakery's potential and Madeline's talent, he proposed a business partnership. Thanks to his investments, She finally moved out of the tiny cramped bakery and relocated into a spacious, beautiful storefront in the city center. Now she had an entire staff working under her, and for the first time, she could focus on creativity instead of survival, always feeling Ethan's steady support beside her, a support that gradually became far more personal. Vanessa and her attorney disappeared from their lives soon after. The legal battles Vanessa had threatened backfired completely once Richard's new lawyers stepped in. On the day of the official grand opening of Madeline's new pastry studio, the room overflowed with flowers and the smell of fresh pastries. Richard Caldwell arrived among the very first guests, but he wasn't alone. Madeline froze in shock as she saw her mother stepping out of an expensive car while Richard carefully helped her by the arm, smiling warmly beside her. It turned out Richard had found her mother shortly after the anniversary party. The reunion between old friends had been quiet, heartfelt, and full of warmth. They sat together at the best table near the window, reminiscing about the past while smiling at Madeline and Ethan, who were enthusiastically discussing new projects with guests. Their eyes kept finding each other across the room, and every glance carried the beginning of something deeper. Justice had finally prevailed, and the honesty Madeline had believed in despite everything brought her not only success, but a real family. If you enjoyed this story, write your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. A brand new dramatic story is coming tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it.